There are moments in life when something feels slightly wrong, yet we ignore it. A quiet voice whispers caution, but we silence it with excuses. We tell ourselves it is harmless. We tell ourselves it is small. We tell ourselves we are strong enough. And yet, long before we fell into it, God warned us about this trap. The trap rarely looks dangerous. It does not announce itself with loud noise or flashing signs. It comes softly. It comes dressed as comfort, success, pleasure, or even opportunity. It promises something good. It promises something easy. But hidden beneath its smooth surface is something that slowly pulls the soul away from truth. God's warnings are rarely shouted. They are planted gently inside the conscience. A feeling of unease, a sentence we once read, a sermon we once heard, a sermon childhood. These are not accidents. They are mercies. They are signals placed on the road before a dangerous turn. The trap works because it speaks to our pride. It tells us we deserve more. It tells us we know better. It convinces us that rules are for weaker people. It makes us believe that this time will be different. But the truth is simple. No one is too strong to fall. The strongest walls crumble when small cracks are ignored. There is a strange thing about spiritual traps. At first, they feel like freedom. We feel bold. We feel independent. We feel in control. But slowly, almost invisibly, the trap tightens. What once felt optional becomes necessary. What once felt small becomes powerful. And what once felt harmless begins to shape our thoughts and choices. God warned you because he sees further than you do. He sees the end from the beginning. He sees the hidden consequences. He sees how one small compromise can become a pattern, and patterns become habits, and habits become character, and character becomes destiny. But here is the mercy. The warning is not only before the trap, the warning continues even after we step into it. The discomfort we feel, the restlessness at night, the sense that something is not right. These are not condemnations. They are invitations, invitations to turn back. Many people believe that once they fall, it is over. They think shame is stronger than grace. They think failure is final. But God does not warn in order to destroy. He warns in order to rescue. The very fact that you feel troubled is proof that your soul is not asleep. The trap loses its power when it is brought into the light. Darkness survives by secrecy. Pride survives by silence. But when a person admits, I was warned and I ignored it, something powerful happens. Humility opens the door for restoration. Perhaps the trap was pride. Perhaps it was anger. Perhaps it was a relationship you knew was wrong. Perhaps it was greed disguised as ambition. Whatever it was, you were not left without warning. And even now, you are not left without hope. God's warnings are not chains. They are guardrails. They are not limitations meant to shrink your life. They are protections meant to preserve it. The trap promises quick reward, but it steals long-term peace. God may seem strict at first, but his path leads to freedom that does not fade. So if you sense that you are near a trap, pause. If you sense that you are already in one, return. The voice that warned you before is still speaking, and the door out is never locked from the outside. There is something deeply unsettling about the way a trap presents itself. It does not usually appear with horns or shadows. It does not introduce itself as destruction. Instead, it comes clothed in something pleasant, reasonable, even admirable. That is precisely why it works. If danger looked like danger, few would approach it willingly. But the most effective traps are subtle. They blend into ordinary life. They attach themselves to good desires. They borrow the language of wisdom while quietly leading the soul in the opposite direction. A trap often begins as a small suggestion. It whispers that this choice is not truly harmful. It assures you that everyone does it. It tells you that you deserve the small indulgence after all you have endured. It rarely demands great rebellion at the beginning. It only asks for a slight adjustment, a minor compromise, a tiny shift away from what you once believed was right. And because the shift is small, it feels harmless. But subtlety is the strategy. Consider how easily good things can be twisted. Ambition is not evil, yet when it quietly transforms into obsession, it begins to consume peace. Rest is not wrong, yet when it becomes constant escape, it weakens discipline. Desire for love is natural, yet when it ignores wisdom, it can bind a heart to what destroys it. The trap does not invent new desires. It simply exaggerates or redirects the ones already living inside you. Subtle traps do not shout, they reason, they negotiate, they speak in calm tones, they offer logical arguments. They say, just this once. They say, you can handle it. They say, you are different from others. And perhaps the most dangerous phrase of all, it is not that serious. The power of subtlety lies in how ordinary it feels. Nothing dramatic happens at first. There is no lightning, no immediate collapse. Life continues. That is what makes it convincing. Another danger of subtle traps is how gradually they move. Rarely does a person wake up and decide to abandon their values entirely. Instead, it happens step by step. One ignored warning becomes easier to ignore the next time. One small excuse prepares the ground for a larger one. The heart adjusts quietly. Standards lower gently. What once troubled the conscience begins to feel normal. The trap tightens not by force, but by familiarity. Subtlety also disguises consequences. Immediate pleasure often hides long-term cost. A dishonest word may solve today's problem, but plant tomorrow's distrust. A secret habit may comfort in the moment, but slowly shape character in ways that are difficult to undo. Because the consequences are delayed, the mind assumes there are none. Silence from the future is mistaken for safety in the present. There is also a peculiar blindness that accompanies subtle traps. Once a person begins to justify a choice, the mind works hard to defend it. Evidence that contradicts the decision is dismissed. Wise counsel sounds overly strict. Gentle warnings feel like judgment. The heart prefers comfort to correction. And so the trap remains hidden not because it is invisible, but because we have chosen not to look too closely. Yet the subtle nature of a trap does not mean it is unstoppable. Awareness weakens it. The moment you pause and examine the reasoning behind a decision, the disguise begins to slip. When you ask yourself not only, can I do this, but what will this shape me into, you begin to see beyond the surface. Subtle traps rely on hurried thinking and emotional impulse. They struggle to survive under honest reflection. It is also important to understand that subtle traps often appear at moments of vulnerability. Fatigue lowers resistance. Loneliness clouds judgment. Success can breed overconfidence. Failure can create desperation. In these moments, the quiet voice of compromise sounds especially comforting. The trap does not attack randomly. It studies weakness. That is why self-awareness and humility are essential protections. Perhaps the most sobering truth is this: subtle traps rarely feel like traps until much later. By the time clarity arrives, habits may already be formed. Relationships may already be strained. Character may already be shaped. That is why early discernment is so valuable. The cost of small wisdom now prevents the burden of heavy regret later. Still, even if one has already stepped into something subtle and harmful, recognition is not defeat. Seeing the trap for what it is the beginning of freedom. The same quiet conscience that once warned before the choice can awaken again after it. Subtle deception may begin the fall, but honest humility can begin the rise. In the end, the danger is not always in loud rebellion, but in quiet drift, not in sudden collapse, but in slow compromise. The trap is subtle, and that is precisely why it must be taken seriously. What feels small today may shape tomorrow. What seems harmless now may quietly determine direction. And wisdom often begins not with dramatic resistance, but with careful attention to the smallest steps. The warning rarely arrives with thunder. It does not usually interrupt your day with spectacle or force your attention through fear. More often it comes quietly, almost gently, like a thought that lingers a little longer than the others. It may feel like hesitation before a decision, a slight tightening in the chest, or a question that refuses to disappear. Because it is not dramatic, it is easy to dismiss, yet its quietness does not make it weak. In many ways, the softest warnings are the strongest, because they appeal not to panic, but to conscience. There is something deeply personal about a quiet warning. It does not embarrass you publicly. It does not expose you before others. It speaks inwardly, where only you can hear it. A loud alarm can be ignored out of pride, but a quiet conviction is harder to escape. It follows you into silence. It waits patiently in moments when distractions fade. It returns when you least expect it, asking calmly whether you are certain about the path you are choosing. The human heart often expects guidance to be obvious. We look for signs that are impossible to misunderstand. We want certainty that requires no reflection. But growth rarely works that way. Instead of forcing obedience, the warning invites awareness. Instead of controlling your decision, it appeals to your character. It respects your freedom while urging you toward wisdom. That is why it feels subtle. It does not overpower your will. It gently shapes it. Many times the warning arrives through memory. A lesson learned long ago suddenly becomes relevant. Words once heard but forgotten rise to the surface of the mind. Advice that once seemed overly cautious begins to make sense. It is as if truth was planted earlier, waiting for the exact moment it would be needed. When the quiet voice speaks, it often uses seeds already sown in the past. At other times, the warning appears as discomfort. Everything may look acceptable on the outside, yet something inside feels unsettled. There may be no clear argument against the decision, no visible flaw in the plan, and yet peace is missing. That absence of peace is not weakness. It is discernment. It is the soul recognizing misalignment before the mind can fully explain it. The problem is not that warnings are absent, it is that noise is abundant. Modern life is filled with constant distraction. Opinions shout from every direction. Desires demand attention. Urgency pushes reflection aside. In such an environment, quiet guidance can easily be drowned out. It is not that the voice has stopped speaking. It is that we have stopped listening carefully enough to hear it. There is also pride that interferes. A quiet warning can feel like doubt, and doubt can feel like weakness. We prefer confidence. We prefer confidence. We prefer decisive action. So when caution appears, we may interpret it as fear and push through it in order to prove strength. Yet true strength is not the absence of hesitation. It is the wisdom to pause when something feels wrong. It is important to understand that quiet warnings are often consistent. They return. If ignored once, they come again in a slightly different form. A conversation with a friend may echo the same concern. A sudden delay may create space for reconsideration. A small obstacle may force reflection. These are not always coincidences. Sometimes they are gentle barriers placed in the path to prevent greater harm. Ignoring quiet warnings does not usually produce immediate disaster. That is why they are easy to silence. Consequences may take time to appear. At first, everything seems fine. Confidence grows, doubt fades, the choice appears justified. But beneath the surface, something has shifted. Each ignored warning makes the next one easier to dismiss. Sensitivity decreases. Conscience becomes quieter, not because it has nothing to say, but because it has not been welcomed. Yet there is mercy in the persistence of quiet guidance. Even after a wrong decision has been made, the voice does not disappear entirely. It may become sharper, more direct, but it remains rooted in care rather than condemnation. Its purpose is not to shame, but to redirect. It calls not to punish, but to restore clarity. Learning to recognize quiet warnings requires stillness. It requires honesty. It requires the courage to ask difficult questions before life forces them upon you. Why am I truly making this decision? What am I trying to prove? What might this choice awaken in me over time? These questions create space where subtle guidance can be heard clearly. In the end, the quietness of the warning